Chapter 4 George's first day at his school passed in a blur of long corridors and confusing schedules. Again and again he found himself in classroom for the wrong subject with older or younger kids. It was noisy, perplexing, and a bit scary at this enormous school. George wondered if this was how Freddie had felt when he'd moved from the quiet, safe world of George's backyard, first to the small, bustling petting farm, and then to the huge, scary new farm. No wonder Freddie hadn't looked happy. On the first day at middle school, even those kids who had been super confident at George's old school looked lost and worried as that they wandered around the huge maze of a building, trying to find the right classrooms. It didn't matter if you hadn't been a friend at elementary school. It was such a relief to see a familiar face, rather than all these terrifying grown-up kids that even sworn enemies suddenly became best friends. George had only just walked out where he was supposed to be when it was time to go home, headed out of the gates. Long ago, at his old school, he used to hide in the courtroom every afternoon until everyone else had left, to make sure he wasn't pounced on during his walk home. But that was before he had learned how to travel across the universe and unravel great cosmic mysteries. Ever since he'd become friends with Annie and learned about the wonders that surround our planet, George had stopped feeling scared. After all, he'd faced down a mad scientist in a distant solar system. After that, there hadn't been much to be afraid of. But it wasn't just the journey that had changed George's life. The knowledge he had gained from those trips had made him feel intrepid. He had used his brain to solve great challenges, and he now knew that he could cope with anything. As he walked home, George thought about Eric and the adventure with Freddie the evening before. Perhaps he thought he could pop over and see Eric to see if they could check off his pig. George kicked himself for not asking where Freddie actually was. That belly had looked lovely, but George but George didn't even know if his pig was still flattered or whether the clever Cosmos had transferred him to some other far-off, miraculous place that could support life as we know it. George was sure that Eric knew where Freddie was, but he'd feel happier if he also knew himself. At home, he dumped his school bag in the hall, then raced right toward his house, only stopping to say a quick hello to his mother and baby sisters, and scoop up a pea and the cabbage muffins, which he crammed into his mouth in one bite. George's mom only cooked with the vegetables from their garden. Sometimes she had strange ideas about which recipes to use for her homegrown produce. He ran straight out of the back door and into the yard where Freddie had once lived. Jumping toward the hole in the fence that led to Annie's backyard. George tore off the path to their back door. He banged on it, but there was no reply. He hammered on it again. The door opened a few inches. It was Annie, back from school, wearing his new green school uniforms. "Oh, George," she said. She didn't look entirely pleased to see him. "Hi, Annie," said George cheerfully. "How's your school?" "Mine was weird, but I think it might be okay." It was all right," she replied rather quietly. "Did you, want something?" George was surprised. He came over all the time and she'd never before asked him why. "Yet," she said, a bit startled. "I was going to ask your dad if he knows where Fred is, so I can go and visit him." "Dad's not here," said Annie apologetically. "I'll tell him you asked. I expect he'll email you later." Then she actually started to close the door in his face. George couldn't believe his eyes. What was going on? Then it all became clear. "Who is it?" came an older voice from behind Annie. "Oh, it's someone who lives next door," said Annie. Looked and fro as the draw the trap between the two of them. "He wants to see my dad." She opened the door a tiny little bit wider, and George could now see the other boy. He was taller than both George and Annie, with black spiky hair and skin the color of caramel, like Annie. He wore a green school uniform. "Hi," he nodded to George over Annie's head. "I'm sorry Eric's not here. You'd better go. We'll tell him you came over." George's jaw dropped in disbelief. "I'm Vincent, by the way," said the boy costly. "Vincent also started my school today," said Annie, not quite admitting George's eyes. "Seriously?" said George in surprise. "You're in 6th grade?" "No." Vincent looked annoyed. "8th grade. I know Annie from outside school." "You do?" said George. "Vincent's dad is a film director," said Annie shyly. But in a way that George just knew meant she was super impressed by Vincent. "He knows my dad. He made Dad's new TV series." "A film director," said George, feeling defeated. "Nice, my dad's an organic gardener," he said defiantly to Vincent. "Come on, Annie," said Vincent. "We should get rolling. Mom's taking us to the skate park." Annie told George. "Vincent is a champion skateboarder." "You roll then," he said, trying to sound normal. "Just roll along." He turned around and walked back along the backyard path until he reached the hole in the fence. Annie and Vincent were still standing in the doorway, watching him. George tried to half constantly through the hole in the fence, as he had done so many times in the past, but it didn't quite work and he crashed into the wooden planks instead, falling to the ground with a thump. George couldn't help looking around. Annie and Vincent were still there, which was super annoying and unfair. When he'd been at the door, they hadn't wanted to open it. Now they wouldn't go away. With as much dignity as he could manage, he picked himself up and calmly stepped through the gap, trying to behave as if nothing had happened. but inside he felt wounded and left out. It was only day one of the school year, and already Annie had a new friend to do cool stuff with. Where did that live, George? Now he had no pig and no Annie either. He suddenly felt empty and alone. He trailed into the house, looking miserable. A little later that afternoon, when George had done his chores and finished his homework, he decided to go back next door, just in case Eric had come home before Joe, Annie, and the champion skateboarder Vincent returned. George found the back door ajar. He pushed it open and sidled it. The house was quiet, dark, and unusually cold, as though inside winter had started, while outside it was still only the beginning of autumn. There didn't seem to be anyone home, but if the back door was unlocked, George thought somebody must be home. He listened carefully for sign of life. Nothing. In the gloom, he suddenly noticed a pale blue light coming from under the door of Eric's study. He tapped on it lightly. Eric, he called. Eric! He put his ear to the door. There was no sound other than the occasional, the mechanical beep, which signaled that inside the study Cosmos was operational. George hesitated. Should he open the door? He didn't want to disturb Eric if he was walking on an important theory, but it might be his only chance to catch him on his own. Using his fingertips, he carefully pushed open the study door. Unless you counted Cosmos, the supercomputer, as a person, there was no one inside Eric's study. Cosmos sat in his usual place on the desk, twinkling away like a Christmas tree, with all his lights on full alert. From his screen shone the twin beams of light that Cosmos used to draw the space bottle. The doorway that had taken George and Annie on so many cosmic journeys. In the middle of the study hung the doorway to space, suspended by the two rays of light and puffed open by one of Eric's sued loafers. Through the crack, George could see a desolate, cratered surface under a deep black sky. He leaned forward to push the door open a little farther so that he could see better, but he was dazzled by brilliant sunlight and had to shield his eyes with his arm. He stepped back from the folded doorway and looked around Eric's study. Suddenly he spotted his own spacesuit, left crumpled on an armchair in the corner. Quickly he folded on, checked the level in his air tank, buckled himself in as Eric had shown him, and preferred to step closer to the entrance to space. With his hands safely encased in the space globes, George pushed at the portal doorway and had a close-up view of the surface of the moon, the closest celestial body to the earth. A greyish expanse of dusty ground stretched far into the distance. It was bathed in harsh sunlight that cast strong shadows across the tree bases. Between the puddle and the mountains, George could make out a tiny figure, bouncing enthusiastically toward a crater in the distance. Even thought it was wearing an all-in-one white spacesuit with a fitted space helmet. George could still tell from even joyous way it was laughing about that it must be Eric. Alert, Eric tended to shamble along a distant, distracted H, but in space he behaved as if he had been set free from earthly cares to enjoy and revel in the wonder of the universe. Taking a bold step forward, George across the threshold and set first one and then the other foot on the moon. As he left the flattered behind him, he floated off the ground, the surface of the moon scrunching under his feet as he landed again. In the moon's low gravity, he could bounce several feet into the air just by gently pushing off with his space boots. The moon. When did our moon form? It's estimated that the moon formed over 4 billion years ago. How did it form? Scientists think that a planet-sized object struck the Earth, causing a dusty, hot cloud of rocky fragments to be catapulted into Earth's orbit. As this cloud cooled down, its component bits and pieces stuck together, eventually forming the moon. How big it is? How big is it? The moon is much smaller than the Earth. You could fit around 49 moons into the Earth. It also has less gravity. If you weighed 100 pounds here on Earth, you would weigh less than 70 pounds on the moon. Does it have an atmosphere? No. This explains why the sky is always dark on the moon, meaning that if you stay in the shade, the stars are visible all the time. What explanation did people have for the moon before scientists discovered how it was formed? A long time ago, people on Earth believed that the moon was a mirror, or perhaps a ball of fire in the night sky. For centuries, humans thought the moon had magical powers to influence life on Earth. In one way, they were right. The moon does affect the Earth, but not by magic. The moon's gravity exerts a pull on oceans, which creates the tide. Could life exist on the moon? The moon cannot support life unless it's wearing a spacesuit, but as a consolation for us, evidence is mounting that the moon contains much more water, the prime ingredient for life as we know it, than scientists thought just a few years ago. It's frozen, thought, and any Earth emigrant to the moon will need to put substantial effort into transporting it into its life-friendly liquid form. Has our moon ever been visited by other civilizations? The nearest celestial object to us has been visited 12 times by astronauts from Earth. Between 1969 and 1972, 12 NASA astronauts walked on the space surface of the moon. Could the moon have been visited before human civilization even began on Earth by extraterrestrials who left the deposit behind them? Could the aliens have come as close as next door to us? It's a very, very long shot. But some scientists on Earth are looking again at moon rock to see whether it holds any clues. Hello, Earthlings! Shouted George, taking a few bounds forward. He knew no one on Earth could hear him, but he just had to say something to mark his first steps on the moon. Set against the darkest of the sky, his home planet looked like a blue-green jewel flecked with white cloud. Although both Annie and George had been on exciting cosmic adventures before, this was the first time George had seen his home planet from so close. From Mars, the Earth had been just a tiny bright fleck in the sky. From Titans, George and Annie hadn't been able to see the Earth and all throughout the thick gaseous clouds on that strange frozen moon of Saturn. And by the time they'd reached the ch4 55th solar system, Earth had been hidden from their eyes altogether. Even using a telescope from the distance, they would have only known that the Earth was there from that very slight, unbearable shift in the color of the light coming from our sun. The star at the center of our solar system. On the moon, however, he was near enough to see the detail of his home planet, but far not way to marvel at its beauty. After admiring the view, he bounced off in Eric's direction, covering the distance between them very, very quickly. By the time he reached the scientist, Eric had disappeared into the shallow crater and was looking at a dusty machine stuck in the bottom of it. Eric, shouted George into his voice transmitter. Eric, it's me, George. Great, the gravitational waves! Exclaimed Eric in shock, looking up from the broken door lunar vehicles. You gave me quite a scare. I wasn't expecting to meet anyone else up here. He hadn't heard the great shout of joy else up here. The joy when George first stood on the moon as George's voice transmitter had been out of range. I came into the study and the moon door was open. Exclaimed George. What are you doing here? I only meant to go to the moon for a minute, said Eric rather guiltily. I wanted to get a little bit of moon rock to take a closer look at it. I've got this theory about alien civilization that I want to work on. I figure that if we were visited by aliens sometimes in the past, say 100 million years ago, they would have left traces somewhere. I don't believe anyone had investigated moon rock to see whether it shows traces of alien investigation. I want to look at the moon rock again with fresh eyes to see whether there is any signature of left in it. No one has examined moon rock this way before, so I thought I'd get some and try myself. Look what I came across when I was collecting samples. It's a lunar rover. Does it still works? Asked George, quickly scrambling down into Eric where Eric stood. It looked as though a dune buggy had crashed and been abandoned on the moon. Eric climbed into the driver's seat while George surveyed the roller thoroughly. Can you make it go? I expect the batteries are died now, by now, said Eric, brushing some dust off the rover with the arm of his spacesuit. There's no steering wheel, noticed George. How do we drive it? Good question. Eric waved his sleeves on his legs, leaving long grey trails of dust on his white spacesuit. There must be some way to switch it on. He fiddled across with a T-shaped joystick between the front seats, but nothing happened. The joystick seemed to be part of a console, whiffing away the lunar dust around it with the thumb of his space gloves. Eric uncovered a series of the switches with the label power, drive power, and drive enable. Aha! Said Eric happily. Houston, we have the answer. George left into the rover alongside Eric. What happened if you flip those switches? He asked excitedly. Can we find out? He hoped Eric wouldn't turn all grown up on his and say that they shouldn't mess around with someone else's moon buggy. But Eric didn't let him down. Yes, we certainly can, replied Eric. He flipped the switches one at a time and then pushed the joystick, making the rover shoot forward very suddenly. The unexpected movement catapulted them both off into the air and out of the vehicles. It works! Eric cried, scrambling back in. George, could you give the rover a push from behind while I drive it out of the crater? With the moon's lack of gravity, it'll be easy. Why do I have to push? Rumbled George. Why don't I get to drive it? But he took up a position behind the moon buggy and braced himself. Eric pushed the joystick forward once more. As he did so, the rover turned its wheels to the ground, showering George with fountains of dust and moon rocks. Push harder, shouted Eric. At that moment, George gave an almighty hip, and the lunar rover struggled out of the crater and onto the flat plane below. There, said Eric, brushing his gloved hands together heavily and puffing out of the driver's seat. That's better. He patted the lunar rover in admiration. What a piece of machinery. It can't have been used for 40 years and it still works. Now, that's what I call a car. Who does it belong to? Asked George, who was now almost entirely covered in moon rock and dust, left by Apollo moon landers I would think, said Eric. Look over there. That must be the descent stage of the lunar module. Eric pointed to a four-legged object spotting in the distance. This is a piece of space history. There was a brief silence as they both wondered at what they had found. Then, suddenly, Eric seemed to realize that he was in fact standing on the moon in the company of his next-door neighbor, a schoolboy called George. George, what are you doing following me out to the moon? He asked. I came to ask you about Freddie, explained George. You didn't tell me where his new home is. I don't even know which planet he's on. Oh, quivering exclaimed Eric, hitting himself on the space helmet with his space gloves. Neither do I. I will have to ask Cosmos. Don't worry. We know that Freddy is perfectly safe and well. We just need to find out where. Was there anything else I forgot? Eric was famous for forgetting things. As he freely admitted, he never forgot important matters like his theories about the universe. But he often forgot day-to-day tasks like putting on his jock or eating his lunch. Well, it's not so much that you forgot, explained George, more that I didn't get to ask you. Ask what? Your work. Looking into the origins of the universe. Is that a dangerous thing to do? No, George, said Eric firmly. It's not dangerous. In fact, I think it would be dangerous if we didn't think about the origins of the universe. If we delved in the speculation rather than in fact about where we come from and what we're doing here. That's dangerous. What we're trying to do is understand how the magnificent universe. Eric swept around his arm around the point and the craggy mountains ranges. The huge dark expanse of the black sky with the distant bubble of wall of planet Earth hanging above the moon's cave came into being. We want to know how and why these billions of stars, the infinite and beautiful galaxies,